This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. This is flyer number 353, entitled A Biconscious Masculist Harangues a Monoconscious Feminist, in 2 parts. Description. As masculists solidify their ideology, it's likely that there'll be a growing number of bitter, verbal and ideological confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, as masculists assault feminists with feminism's monoconsciousness, that is, its utter ignorance of how women oppress men, and far worse. This flyer presents a passionate dialogue between a biconscious masculist and a monoconscious feminist. Guess who wins? Flyer itself. Press the link. Just waiting for it to come up. Waiting, what's happening? Taking a long time to come up. Where the hell is it? Oh, sorry. It's been a few months since I've done this. Okay, make it a bit bigger still. Okay. A Biconscious Masculist Harangues a Monoconscious Feminist, by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer imagines a verbal, ideological clash between a biconscious masculist and a monoconscious feminist, an event that's likely to occur with much greater frequency in the near future as masculist ideas continue to spread throughout the culture and more men are woken up to their gender oppression by fluffy feminist hypocrites, who then get angry, that is the men, and express their male anger at monoconscious feminazis, haranguing them out of the room. For those of you who are not familiar with the terms biconscious and monoconscious, I begin with some quick definitions. Otherwise this flyer will make no sense to you. A monoconscious feminist, by definition, has had only her feminist consciousness raised, that is, only one, that's in brackets, gender political consciousness raised. She's been made aware by her exposure to feminist ideas that men oppress women, and so of course she's angry at men for this and tends to have a rather negative attitude towards men for men's oppression of women. This anger makes her rather feminazi bitchy, which makes her unattractive to men. So men punish her by ignoring her, not even pumping and dumping her, forcing her feminazi bitch genes to be removed from the gene pool, since men refuse to give her their sperm, especially the quality men with their superior DNA, whom such women really want to mate with in order to get that superior DNA from the superior man for her kids. Feminazis are thus eliminated by masculists and MGTOWs, that is, men going their own way, who refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, by living the lifestyle of the MGTOW monk, or living the twef, in brackets, equals 2A, 2F, equals 2 apartments, 2 FIPs, that is, financially independent persons, lifestyle, where the man and the woman see each other regularly for sex and companionship, but no marriage, no kids, no parasitism, no cost to the man. If the woman starts showing her traditional female traits of nagging, controlling, whining, emotionality, irrationality, hysterics, etc. to the man, then the man just walks away, back to his own apartment and his own life, cost-free to him. Men don't have to pay the traditional price of being a manslave to a woman to get regular sex from her, paying for her to sit on her fat parasitic ass, raising her kids in a middle-class house, having him pay for it all, then divorcing him a decade later in a fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system that will give custody of his kids with 90% probability to his ex-wife, half his stuff to her, force him to pay child payments to her with little visitation rights, and if the ex-wife is a real fluffy, that equals traditional woman who expects to parasite off the money of a man, he may have to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up, that is, become a FIP, financially independent person, by bothering to get a career competent education that will allow her to become an adult, that is, a morally responsible FIP. Monoconscious feminists today, that's 2020, are a real pain in the ass. They are well informed about how men oppress women and are angry at men for this, but nearly all women in 2020 know nothing about masculism, so know nothing about how women oppress men, and in fact oppress men far worse than vice versa, since these women, these monoconscious feminists, know nothing about women's oppression of men, since by definition they are monoconscious. A biconscious masculist, or anyone of either sex, has had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. That is, they are very aware that gender oppression is a two-way street, not a one-way street, as the monoconscious feminists believe. Biconscious masculists are familiar with the gender political arguments of both sides, that is, both feminist and masculist, so have a much more balanced picture of which sex oppresses which other sex, and by how much. Biconscious masculists, thanks to their biconscious knowledge, can see that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, because women's oppression of men is much deeper, lasting decades, than men's oppression of women. Instead of continuing, as above, with a rather academic portrayal of monoconscious and biconscious awareness, I'll switch to a dialogue form of presentation that's much more emotional and dramatic, in order to hit both the intellect and the gut, which is usually a much more effective approach in persuading people to adopt a desired viewpoint than a purely rational approach. So, imagine a rather virulent monoconscious feminist of the feminazi type who is angry with men, who thinks that she has good reason to be angry with men for the ways that men oppress women, and hence deserve to be treated negatively by women, by feminists. Imagine also that this monoconscious feminist gets into a conversation with a biconscious masculist, equally virulent, who is very aware of how women oppress men, and watch the sparks fly. I hope you find the following dialogue, the following passionate exchange between these two polar opposites, both entertaining and informative. F, that's female or feminist, in quotes.
Women should be respected equally with men, because women are just as capable as men if given equal opportunities with men, both socially and legally.
End quote. M, that is male or masculist, in open quotes. I'm both a masculist, that's a men's libber, and a scientist, so I'm informed about the differences between males and females. Yes, there is considerable overlap between the performance score distributions of men and women. So on the whole, for most of the population, men and women are both capable of doing most jobs, but women are not as capable as men at performing the most difficult jobs because of women's genetic inferiority compared to men. Men are smarter than women by 4 IQ points on average. Men have a 10% higher IQ variance than women, so the morons and the genii are male. So it's not surprising that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes. Men have much higher testosterone levels than women, so are more aggressive, more ambitious, more dogged, so achieve far more. Most damning fact about women is their 10% smaller brains, which is a lot, like taking an ice cream scoop out of the male brain, which utterly crushes any attempt by the feminists to pretend that women are men's equals, when women have 10% smaller brains, 10 billion fewer neurons, 10% less neuronal processing capacity. So it's not surprising that women invent almost nothing, build almost nothing, create almost nothing. At the top end of a performance scale, women are genetically inferior to men. That's simply a scientifically verified fact that the feminazis will just have to accept. And if they don't, that is, if they behave as iscyanate fairies, that is, unable to think scientifically due to ignorance of science, and fairies as living in a fairyland, believing what they want to believe without evidence, which makes them no better than religionists or flat earthers, then masculine scientists like me will bite their fucking heads off in masculine scientists' attacks on them for their iscyanate ignorance and incompetence. F. Enraged and lashing out with considerable venom.
You are a typical male chauvinist pig that the feminists despise. We punish such men by totally avoiding them, treating them as vermin, as fossils, who know nothing about feminism and the desire of women to be treated equally with men. Feminists like me have a hatred of men like you and have nothing to do with you.
End quote. M. Yes, I know. But don't kid yourself about men like me, that is, masculine scientists, knowing nothing about feminism. I've probably read more feminist books than you have, and am well aware of feminist arguments. I don't deny that men oppress women. You only have to read the feminist books to see how men oppress women. The masculists, that is men's livers, that is men who liberate themselves from being man-slaves to women, working for women, going their own way, refusing to marry, rejecting paternity, spending their money on themselves, are biconscious, that is, they do not see gender oppression as a one-way street as you do, because you are what the masculists call, quote, a typical monoconscious feminazi, end quote, who is only informed about how men oppress women and who knows nothing about how women oppress men, with women's financial parasitism leeching off men financially for decades, manslaving men, treating men with the infamous fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the fluffy feminist dominated divorce courts. In brackets, a fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man by not bothering to get a career-competent education, so that in her 30s, after a decade of jumping from one penis to another in her 20s, she expects to be able to live off the money and labour of some gullible manslave who has been brainwashed all his pathetic life, largely by women, that his role in life is to be a manslave to a woman, to work for her, to sacrifice his life for her. Masculism is essentially a rebellion by men against being manslaves to women, freeing themselves from traditional manslavery to sexploitative fluffies by forcing fluffies to fip up or be punished by men by being left on the shelf. Masculists see fluffies as vermin to be wiped out because masculists see them as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin. We masculists punish such women by wiping out their fluffy genes from the gene pool, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, leaving only more FIP women who pull their financial weight, who bother to get a career-competent education so that they can be morally responsible FIPs as adults and not parasite off the money of some gullible, stupid manslave whom the masculists are out to educate, to liberate from a lifetime of manslavery to a bloody fluffy. F. feeling profoundly threatened, as this is the first time in her life that she has been confronted with a masculist who has laid out the masculist case with such persuasive coherence, forcing her to admit, maybe reluctantly, that the monoconscious existence she has led for most of her life is only half the story. A revelation that to her is so threatening that she feels cognitive dissonance, that is, the great psychological discomfort felt when one's core beliefs are hotly contested. In the past, cognitive dissonance has caused wars, for example, the religious wars of the 17th century, the ideological wars of the 20th century, etc. Quote,
"What an utterly selfish viewpoint! That then leaves women to raise children of their own. Without children, there will be no continuation of the species. Your policy is dangerous because it threatens to wipe out the species, so will require governments to stamp you out. You are genociders. You are supremely selfish, thinking only of yourselves and not of the bigger picture of the survival of the species by the necessity of raising the next generation. If you masculists continue to preach as you are doing lately, then we feminists will push governments to outlaw you and wipe you out. When push really comes to shove, you have become genociders. You have to be stopped. Your ideology is both highly irresponsible and criminal. You are monsters."
M. We masculists say the same about you feminazis and hate you feminazis right back. We label you indirect genociders because you are the indirect cause of the creation of the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, and masculist movements, due to your takeover of the divorce courts in all your hated fluffy feminist hypocrisy, making divorce so toxic for men that in many Western countries now, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves. We masculists see you fluffy feminists as hypocrites and hate you for it because you behave as feminists in the parliaments, and as masculists we have no problems with giving equal rights and opportunities to women, since such rights are seen by the masculist theorists as prerequisites for the effective fipping of women. But you fluffy feminists reject equal obligations with men by refusing to fip up, expecting fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money of a man when you want kids. So you behave as feminists in the parliaments, but as fluffies in the divorce courts. That hypocrisy makes you fluffy feminists hated by the masculists. End of first half.